What kind of man likes violence so much he constantly prowls the streets looking for women to attack? With more than a dozen attacks on women with more than 7 lives wasted, this man is indeed one of France's most dangerous criminals. Welcome, my darlings. If you're seeing me for the first time, my name is Annie and I post true crime cases here on my channel. And today we are in France, looking at the case of a serial offender. This case is a typical example of how the things that goes wrong in our childhood can affect who we become in our adult life. This is the case of Guy Georges. Guy Georges, whose birth name was actually Guy Rampillon, was born on October the 10th of 1962 to a single mother at Vitry-le-François. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. This place is in the east of France. His birth certificate, however, shows that he was born in the central city of Angers on October the 15th of 1962, not October the 10th when he was actually born. You will get to find out why there are different dates and cities as we go on discussing this case. But whichever one it was, he was born in October in 1962. Even though his father lived with his mother for a bit, he still appears on Guy's birth certificate as unknown. However, we now know Guy to be the son of a U.S. Air Force cook called George Catwick, who had been serving at the French NATO base at the time, but he had long since returned back to the U.S. We are now aware of this information all thanks to the new law that stopped the registration of adopted children under false details in order to stop them from knowing their origins. I don't even know why someone would think it was a good idea to stop adopted children from tracing their origins if they wanted to in the first place. Guy's mother, Helen, abandoned him when he was only 6 years old to state custody, simply because she wanted to marry a U.S. serviceman and emigrate to California. But she took with her her oldest son. His name was Stefan, and he was 3 years older than Guy. Guy and Stefan had different fathers who were both Americans, but Stefan's father was white and Guy's father was black. Helen herself came from a military family, and when she had left for the US, her father, who was already retired by this time, took her oldest son Stefan in until she was able to get him over to the US. But they had refused to take Guy in majorly because in their hometown of Angers, there was an intolerable social stigma attached to mixed-race birth. He was considered black, and so his grandparents didn't want none of that attention of raising a black kid. He was an illegitimate child and therefore an embarrassment to them. All this time, Guy was in and out of different foster homes until he finally found a temporary home with his Catholic foster mother, Jeanne Morin. But that meant he had to get a new birth certificate with false details, basically to prevent him from tracing his roots in future, and that will explain the different birthdays I spoke about earlier. So Guy's foster mom was not new to raising children of color. She had raised 7 of her own children and 12 foster kids, so she pretty much thought she knew what she was doing with Guy. But when Guy started approaching adolescence, he began to get out of hand. He began to steal, First, it was just petty theft of food from the family kitchen. Then it was from the food store. Then, by the time he had developed interest and moved on to the game of hunting, he stole himself a sharp-pointed kitchen utensil to hunt animals in the woods and the forest around Angers. Fast forward to when he was 14 years old, it was obvious Guy was a troubled teen. He attacked 2 of his foster sisters, but both attacks were at different times, and thank goodness he wasn't successful. In November of 1976, he attempted to squeeze the life out of one of his mentally disabled adopted sisters called Rosalind. Thank goodness his foster parents were able to intervene. But for what he did, he was only reprimanded by his foster parents and no further action was taken. Then 2 years later, in 1978, at 16 years old, he attacked a second sister called Catherine, beating her with an iron bar and injuring her badly. But luckily, she managed to escape after biting him hard, and that was more than his foster mother could handle at that point. So she arranged for him to be returned to the authorities, and then he was taken to a state orphanage for adolescents. The very next day, by the time he had turned 17, Guy attacked a woman and ripped up her face open with a sharp kitchen utensil as he attempted to steal from her. The following years of Gil's life up until he was 35 years old was spent in and out of prison. That pretty much means that almost half of his life was spent in jail basically. So by this time in George's life, his violent temper and outbursts was on the increase. He just didn't know how to bring it under control. On the 6th of February 1979, he manifested. He attacked a girl called Pascal C, whom he had followed from a bus stop in Angers and tried to end her by attempting to strangle her after stalking her into the woods. But she managed to escape and went to the police to make a report. Guy was arrested by the police but released only after a week. I don't know why, but yes, just 1 week. He had nowhere to go. His foster family had already given up on him since it was too much trouble. They didn't want him anymore. This added to his pain as they were the only ones that had ever showed him care, but he had blown that opportunity to stay with them. Twice in his life he had been rejected, once by his biological family and then his foster family, and Guy didn't take the rejection well, and he gradually sunk into depression and turned to alcohol to help him numb his pains. In May of 1980, he again attacked one Jocelyn S. Then in the same month, he attacked another girl called Rosalind C. For Rosalind C, he kept going at her face with a sharp kitchen utensil, almost disfiguring her beyond recognition. But luckily, both girls survived the attacks. These attacks led to Gil getting arrested once again. This time, he spent a year in prison in Angers. After doing his time, he decided it was time to change scenes, so he moved to Paris with one of his friends. In Paris, he had no job. He joined a group of squatters, which was like a common thing at the time, where they would all squat together in the house with little or no payment, but he had nothing to do to earn a living, so he committed petty crimes at the area he squatted in the east of the city, just like before. While he was known by fellow squatters as a decent and gentleman, at night he would wander the streets of Paris, drinking in cafes as he observed the nightlife and the young beautiful women going about their affairs. At 19, he was drinking excessively, way above what anyone, no matter the age, should be drinking, and this led to yet another crime that he committed. Or should I say, he contributed to it, because clearly his judgment was poor. He was making the worst of decisions. On the 16th of November 1981, it was just the next month after his birthday, and he went out and indecently assaulted an 18-year-old neighbor of his called Natalie C. He took a sharp object to her body multiple times for no reason. He just loved to hurt people because Natalie C had done nothing to him other than just being his neighbor and minding her business. After he attacked her, he fled the scene thinking he had ended her life, but somehow Natalie pushed through and managed to survive the attack. For this, he only got a 5-month prison sentence, and by June the 7th of 1982, he had attacked another woman called Violet K in a car park, and in his usual MO, indecently assaulted her, then comes a stabbing, then he attempted to strangle her, but yet again, this woman managed to escape and went straight to the police. The police immediately began looking for him, and days later, he was apprehended. For this crime, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Guy was enjoying the excitement of the chase. He lived for the hours he used to follow these women before he attacked them. He practically walked the streets of Paris with a backpack that contained his tools for assault, stalking, and waiting for his next victim. So shortly after his release in February of 1984, he again attacked another female in a parking lot. Her name was Pascal N. She was 21 years old. She again escaped and went to the police. It was apparent he was not going to stop, so that evening he was arrested and remanded in prison. In 1985, he was finally sentenced to 10 years in prison. This will be the first time he gets such a long sentence for all his crimes. Magically, while in prison, Guy was a model inmate. He was well behaved, so much that towards the end of his sentence, he was allowed to go out of prison during the day, but on the condition that he reports back every evening to his cell. He was abiding by these rules, but the evil in him just wouldn't let him keep pretending to be a good person when he was not. On the evening of 24th of January 1991, Guy was nowhere to be found. That day, he hadn't reported back to prison as he was supposed to. Instead, he had traveled to Paris While in Paris, sitting in a cafe, he saw a young, attractive 19-year-old student walking down the road. Her name was Pascal Escoffier. On that day, she had dressed particularly carefully because she had an interview for a part-time work in an ice cream parlor. Guy, upon seeing her, was immediately attracted to the young woman with long blonde hair as she walked past the cafe where he was sitting. He followed her going unnoticed till she got to her front door. As she tried getting into her home, just when she was opening the door, he grabbed her and forced her to let him into the apartment while holding a sharp utensil to her neck. She looked at him and asked him what he wanted, and he replied, "I want you." When they both get into her home, he then bound her hands with sticky tape, cut off her clothes with his sharp tool, indecently assaulted her, then he began looting the flat. He was angered when she gave him a kick, so he pushed her back on the bed and took her life by using the utensil on her throat. By 3 a.m. that early morning, Pascal's father, Jean-Pierre, got the call from the police that his daughter was gone. It was a very painful thing to hear. Meanwhile, Guy had returned to the prison a week later, like it was just another regular week, and no one questioned where he had been. The prison only made sure that since he had failed to check in like he should, he wasn't allowed out again until his sentence was over. He would later on say that he didn't know what force guided him to commit that particular crime. He felt like doing it, so he did. Fast forward to 1992, he got out of prison. He had done his time and had been released, and he wasted no time in finding another young female victim. So on the 22nd of April 1992, this time it was Eleanor D. Luckily, Eleanor escaped and reported the incident to the police. Guy was arrested once more. I am not sure if he did time for this crime and how long it was. But on the 7th of January 1994, he again attacked 27-year-old Catherine Rocha in an underground parking garage as she was trying to lock up her car. He held her against her will and indecently assaulted and ended her life. Somehow, even though this case bore great resemblance to the case of Pascal N., whom he had attacked also at the parking garage, authorities didn't link it. The rate at which this gay maniac was going, it was scary. Barely 6 days after taking Catherine's life, on the 13th of January 1994, he attacked another woman called Annie L. on the patio of her home. Annie was a radio host and was just on the patio of her home relaxing when Guy came for her. His next attack was on the 9th of November 1994 in an underground parking garage again. He indecently assaulted 22-year-old Elsa Bernardi and ended her life. Elsa had just been to see her mom, who was traveling to Canada, and was already in her car when Guy knocked on the window and asked her what the time was. As she went down to respond, he forced his way into the car. Later on the 9th of December 1994, he followed another woman home. He indecently assaulted and ended the life of 32-year-old Dutch architect Agnes Nietkamp in her home. By this time, the media was already catching up on things and had begun to report on a serial offender who was attacking women in East Paris. Knowing this information didn't deter Guy. In 1995, he struck again. In June, he attacked 23-year-old Elizabeth Ortega. Guy had approached and asked her for a cigarette, which she gave him, but then he forced her into her apartment, attempting to end her life, but she managed to narrowly escape by climbing through a window in her flat. After she escaped, she went straight to the police, telling them all that had happened. She said he had a weapon that looked like that which he would use to debone a leg of a lamb, so at least they knew what type of weapon he was using. The police went back to her apartment where they found a cigarette butt Guy left behind at her apartment, and this was collected and stored. The very next month, on the 8th of July 1995, Guy indecently assaulted and took the life of 27-year-old Dutch woman Helen Franklin in her apartment after she had returned from an evening out. It will later come to light that the police didn't question her neighbors until many months later. This meant that if any one of them had seen anything suspicious, they might have forgotten at the time they were questioned. The very next month after Helen's attack on the 25th of August 1995, Guy again assaulted Melanie B. Meanwhile, the police were intensifying their investigations as to these numerous attacks. Elizabeth, who had been lucky to escape, was able to give a description of her attacker. Guy was a person of interest, but when Guy's picture was shown to her, she could not positively identify him. She had said that her attacker was of North African descent, about 25 years old, athletic build, black shaved hair, about 1.7 meters darkish skin, oval face, fine features, while in fact Guy's appearance suggests African-European descent. It's possible that her memory had faded since she was only asked to give a description over 24 months after the attack. That was not good enough on the part of the police. Misleading evidence added to the sloppy police work, more so because just like in the Karabo Mokwena's case from South Africa, different squads were working on the case. If you haven't watched the video on Karabo Mokwena, I will link it up at the end of this video for you. So like I was saying, one squad was trying to solve the cases in the flats and the other squad was working on those in the underground parking parks. And somehow, they failed to spot the link between the two series of incidents despite several striking similarities. However, they were already working on DNA profiles they had gotten from two separate crime scenes, including that of Agnes and the DNA from the cigarette butt and the footprints gotten from Helle Franken's apartment. They were all sent to a private lab run by Dr. Olivia Pascal for comparison. They all were unmatched to each other, but they had no database to compare it to. So what they did was they began combing through records of prisoners and those in psychiatric wards, and they came upon Guy's violent history. They asked him for blood sample for DNA and he accepted. This sample was compared to a tiny bit of red vital body fluid found in the car of one of the victims, but it didn't match. They didn't think to compare it to the actual DNA from the crime scenes. Meanwhile, Guy was still hunting for more victims. By September of 1997, he attacked and attempted to indecently assault one Estelle F., but she fought him and escaped. Just a few days after this, on the 23rd of September 1997, he broke into the apartment of 19-year-old student Magali Sirotti, where he indecently assaulted her and ended her life. Magali Sirotti's attack happened in the late afternoon as she returned from work to the flat where she lived with her fiancé, a garage mechanic. They were planning to get married in the spring and her wedding dress was hanging in the wardrobe. How sad that her life was cut short in this manner. It was like with each attack, Guy's thirst was fueled because only 5 days later, he assaulted Valerie L. in the stairway of her apartment block on the 28th of October 1997. The very next month, on the 16th of November 1997, he broke into the home of 25-year-old Estelle Matt. By his usual MO, he assaulted her and ended her life. She will be the last known victim of the so-called Beast of Bastille, as he became known as. By this time, police investigations were on high gear. They were beginning to piece together the missing pieces in the numerous unsolved assaults in Paris. The media took the news of a possible serial offender and ran with it, and the population of Paris, especially the women, were beginning to panic. The Beast of Bastille, as he was called, because of the Bastille quarters where most of the crimes had taken place, was still on the loose. It quickly became what was referred to at the time as the biggest manhunt in French history. The judge in charge, Judge Thiel, ordered all the DNA labs in the country to compare samples. Dr. Olivier Pascal compiled about 3,500 samples and compared them. Then on the 23rd of March 1998, there was a breakthrough. He had found a match. Finally, on the 27th of March 1998, Guy George was found and arrested outside the Blanche metro station, and within 48 hours of his arrest, he had offered to relieve his conscience by giving police details of his first murder in 1991. Over the following months, he gave graphic details of how he took the lives of 5 women in their Paris apartment, 4 of them around midnight, and 2 other women who had been found indecently assaulted with their throats cut in underground car parks. Even if he hadn't confessed, the authorities had DNA evidence tying him to the crimes. He was, upon his arrest, thrown in jail as he awaited his trial, but in typical Guy George's fashion, he couldn't stay put. In December of the year 2000, just a few weeks before his trial, this man attempted to escape from jail but was unsuccessful. Everyone was tired of Guy at this point. How can just one person be so heartless and problematic? He was therefore subjected to psychiatric assessment to know if all was well with him upstairs. He was declared legally sane and fit to stand trial, so on Monday the 19th of March 2001, at the Palais de Justice in central Paris, his trial began. He was all smiles as he entered the courtroom. There were lots of witnesses for the prosecution, over 50 of them, including his foster mother and some of the women who had managed to escape from him during his assaults. During his trial, he recanted his confession, stating that the evidences in the case had nothing to do with him. Then he pleaded not guilty, claiming the police had forced him to confess. It's just like the case of the Mataheko serial offender from Ghana, which I'll be bringing to you soon, so you should be looking forward to that video. During this time, Guy's original birth certificate was released and he became aware of the true identity of his father. He was happy that his father was an American, and this was kind of like a breath of fresh air for him. Knowing who his father was something he had longed for so long, and 8 days into the trial, he readmitted his guilt, breaking down and confessing that he was indeed responsible for the demise of all the women. He also asked for forgiveness from the victim's family. The trial ran till the 5th of April 2001, and Guy Georges was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 22 years for the indecent assault and murder of 7 women between 1991 and 1997. If all things work in his favor, by next year, 2023, he should be out. Guy Georges told psychiatrists, quote, "Better I'm in prison. Outside, I am dangerous," end quote. He has been diagnosed as hyper-adaptable, coloring himself to his environment in the same way as he adapted his personality to night prowling, arbitrating in squads, living rough and seducing a number of women. I did mention that women thought him very charming and warm, and while all of this was going on, he didn't have a steady girlfriend. No one thought he had a bad side to him. She never knew he was in fact the beast of Bastille. Guy has been described as one of France's most dangerous criminals, so let's hope by next year, 2023, Guy is not back on the streets. Let me know what you think about this case in the comments. One thing you should learn from this case is that there is always evil lurking around, so in all you do, please be vigilant, especially when dealing with strangers. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification so you don't get to miss any of my uploads. Until next video, stay safe and take care of you and yours.